What's up, guys? We're going to roll through chapter 2, which is about the founding and the Constitution. I'll go as quickly as I can here, all right? I will be stopping periodically and giving you kind of the answers to the test questions that accompany this, as it will be posted on Edpuzzle. So, no further ado, let's talk here about some Enlightenment philosophers that helped give shape to the thoughts that formed our founding documents. Let's start with number one, Thomas Hobbes. Thomas Hobbes believed that governments should have limits on the powers they exercise, and that political systems are based on the idea of contract theory, meaning that political systems are based on the idea that the people of a country voluntarily gave up some freedom in exchange for an ordered society, and therefore monarchs or kings who ruled that society therefore derived their legitimacy from this contract, not from a God-given right to rule. This is going to be a huge change in the way that we see where power actually comes from. People give up certain rights in order to have the security that comes from living in a peaceful society. This contract theory will change a lot about that relationship between people and government and the reasons why we think why power exists, especially when it comes to kings and queens. But as you're going to see, that phrase derive their just power, okay, is going to find its way into our Declaration of Independence, but in a much different context. So hold on, and you'll see that as we kind of go through this and in this class. The second one we have here is Mr. Johnny Locke. All right. John Locke, number one, advanced ideas of Republican government, which means another word for Republican means would be representative democracy. Okay, representative democracy, as in we don't actually, as individual citizens, vote on every little thing that comes about, every little law and everything like that. What we do is we vote on people to go and represent us. Okay, that's a Republican form of government. Second of all, he argued that the people retained rights despite the social contract they had made with the monarch. All right, just because we've got this contract theory doesn't mean that we aren't still retaining some rights. And you're going to see again that idea kind of come about in the Bill of Rights to the Constitution is once we get past 1787 in this lecture. Third, people's property required protection, as did their lives and liberty. And you need to understand what he's going to basically be saying here. If this sounds at all familiar, because much of the Declaration of Independence and many other founding documents were very much plagiarized from John Locke and other Enlightenment philosophers' ideas. Because what John Locke would have told you is that we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, the pursuit of property, right? The thing that Mr. Jefferson changed here is he said happiness instead of property. But in the American mind, property and happiness, they are pretty much synonymous, okay? And then he also said that people of a country have a right to overthrow a government they believe to be unjust or tyrannical. And again, you're going to see that exact phraseology come into the Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence is big time John Locke. All right. Now, the third guy is actually going to come into the way our government is formed. This is the Baron de Montesquieu. Okay. Good looking fellow, as you can see there. The Baron de Montesquieu believed that power needs to be balanced by power. So, therefore, there has to be a separation of powers. If you put too much power in any one branch of government, any one person, anyone, anything, that's going to lead to corruption, and therefore it's going to lead to a difficulty when it comes to changing things. All right. And his ideas were central to the three branch system of government that instituted by the Constitution. The very first test question we're going to have here is going to come from Montesquieu. And it says Montesquieu called blank the principle of giving each branch of government its own constituency. Okay. And the answer that you're looking for there is a mixed regime. Okay. Montesquieu called a mixed regime the principle of giving each branch of government its own constituency. All right. Let's move on. Now, around the time of the American Revolution, there were five sectors to the colonists' society that existed at the time. The five sectors were the New England merchants, the Southern planters. Okay, keep numbers 1 and 2. Okay, those two right there as kind of an example of what the former upper class kind of was. Right. In the middle, right there, you have number 3, which is going to be royalists or the holders of royal lands, offices, and patents. They're going to be the special group in this whole thing because they're going to be the ones that's actually kind of removed and it's going to completely change political power structures here. Numbers 4 and 5 are going to be kind of together on their own set there, and they're the number 4 shopkeepers, artisans, and laborers, and number 5 the small farmers. Now here's what you can kind of see. If you look at the way this is all set up, numbers 1 and 4 are primarily in the north. Numbers 2 and 5 are primarily in the south. Now, there's plenty of small farmers up in the north and things like that, but primarily these are the groups we're talking about here. So you kind of have your upper and lower ish in numbers 1 and 2, and then numbers 4 and 5. And what's going to happen here is that these upper people right here, they kind of had the most of the money and everything like that. They're very economically interested people. Numbers 4 and 5, they're the ones actually kind of struggling. And anytime any kind of small tax hits from the king, they're the ones hit hardest. And so what you're going to see is that numbers 4 and 5 end up being what we would call at that time our social radicals. They're the ones that are fighting the most against these taxes and things like that of the king. It's an important thing. And these radicals are going to be the ones that end up having more and more and more political power as this thing goes on. By the time you know what happens in the revolution, all right? I'm not breaking any, ruining any movie for you here. The Americans win, the British lose. They're going to go home, and we're going to have to kind of form our own government, do these kind of things here. So once that happens, the royalists or the holders of royal lands, offices, and patents, that portion of number 3 right there, they're gone. They had been the one kind of balancing everything. And what's going to happen is that political power is going to bend increasingly towards the radicals, which would be on numbers 4 and 5, right? And so when we kind of see this as it plays out, well, what was taking place here? Well, this painting here, if you can't already tell, is of the Boston Massacre, right? The 5 people that were killed by British soldiers as they were kind of protesting there in Boston. Or how about the next picture, which is of the Boston Tea Party? Yes, Boston. They were absolutely writhing in discontent, right? But these Sons of Liberty, they were social radicals. They were kind of led by guys like Sam Adams, who was himself a little bit of a small business owner. And these radicals are going to be increasingly popular and increasingly politically powerful. A lot of our founders are actually kind of from the numbers 1 and 2 sectors, right? But increasingly so, we're seeing a change towards these others. So, what will ultimately happen? Here's your next test question. It says the American victory in the Revolutionary War changed the balance of political power in the new states so that royal land, office, and patent holders became the controlling force in many state legislatures, and pre-revolutionary radicals were significantly. Hang on a second, I read that wrong. Back off of that. American victory in the Revolutionary War changed the balance of political power in the new states so that royal land, office, and patent holders were significantly weakened, and pre-revolutionary radicals became the controlling forces in many state legislatures. All right, got to write that time, I think. Yeah. Okay. So what's this process play out like, right? Well, number 1, we have the First Continental Congress, then we have the Second Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress, and this is another test question for you here. The First Continental Congress was a group of colonial delegates assembled in 1774 that called for a total boycott of all British goods. All right, they called for a boycott of British goods. In the First Continental Congress, they're not calling for a Declaration of Independence. They're not calling for the raising of armies to march on the British or anything like that. They're trying to maintain peace, but do it with a boycott. But obviously, the things that took place in 1774, 1775 are going to lead to the things that took place in 1776, which is going to call for a Second Continental Congress. And the Second Continental Congress calls for a Declaration of Independence. And what was the Declaration of Independence? You're going to need to know this moving forward. But the Declaration of Independence was a breakup letter. Okay, it was a lawyer's brief giving the reasons for this revolution. Okay, and it's going to basically list this thing that the king is doing, and this is why the revolution has to happen. All right, Declaration of Independence, important document. It was a remarkable. Um, it was a remarkable philosophical statement for its time because it asserted that there were inalienable rights that could not be abridged by governments. Okay, so let's get to the other thing that took place here in that Second Continental Congress. The Second Continental Congress is going to set up a new government because if we're going to declare our independence, we also now have to have a government set up. So, what government do we set up? We're going to set up what's called the Articles of Confederation, right? Articles of Confederation. What is a confederation then, right? A confederation. Let's find it here. A confederation is a system of government in which member states retain almost all of their sovereign authority and delegate limited powers to a weak central body. Okay. That's the government we originally set up, as in all of the power was distributed to the states, and that the central government that we were setting up there didn't actually have any power. Um, we did this because we didn't trust centralized power. Because who were we fighting against? The king, who had centralized power. But we're also going to see that setting that up that way is also going to be a big reason why the American Revolution was a struggle. And a lot of things could have been easier had we given a little bit more power to that central government, but we won't go there. What were some of the problems that we had with the Articles of Confederation? Well, number one, Congress did not have the power to lay taxes. Congress could say, hey, we need you states to send money to us so that we can do fill in the blank, right? But we couldn't actually make the states do that. We couldn't tell them that they had to pay these taxes. Again, what are we fighting against? We're fighting against a king because he taxed us. And now here we are in a situation where this new government needs to call on and ask for taxes, and we can't get it. We couldn't pay our soldiers who were fighting to give us independence. Think about the irony there, right? The president or chief executive had no real power to respond to anything in any kind of a quick manner. So, any kind of emergency structure that took place, there wasn't anybody to just quickly respond. That kind of thing didn't exist, and it will be a big reason why once we're finally ready to get rid of the Articles of Confederation, move to the Constitution, we're going to want something a little bit different in our new president. And then your next one here, another test question. How was political power in the Continental Congress divided under the Articles of Confederation? And the answer to that is that each state had an equal vote. Each state had an equal vote. Going on, all right? What else? This was primarily a constitution concerned with limiting the powers of the central government. That was the number one goal. We don't want the central government to have too much power. This left us with pretty much no executive branch, so therefore execution was kind of left to the states. Your test question there, under the Articles of Confederation, it was left to the states to execute laws passed by the Continental Congress. Um, the salaries of government officials, they had to be paid by the states. The power to declare war, make treaties, coin and borrow money, regulate trade with Native Americans, that was all left to the states, right? We couldn't even coin money. We couldn't make treaties. We couldn't do these kind of things. And then furthermore, any amendment to the Articles of Confederation required all states to agree. And you can imagine if you ask the 13 colonies to order pizza, not everybody's going to want the same kind of thing. So getting any kind of cooperation there, not real easy. So how do we do this? How do we make change? And again, you can kind of see in the picture here, all of these states had to have their own form of money. So yeah, there was like Rhode Island money, there was Connecticut money, there was New York money, there was Pennsylvania money. And what is that money based off of? What's those exchange rates look like? How many Rhode Island dollars does it take to equal a New York dollar, or vice versa, right? What does that look like? And you can imagine the chaos that ensues when you're trying to run an economy when you can't even have a single form of money that they can trade hitherto, right? Oh well. So we win the American Revolution. Again, we didn't give away any plots to the movie or anything like that. The United States wins the war. After the war, we still have the Articles of Confederation that is our first form of government. And we got guys like George Washington that's still in charge of the Continental Army and things like that. And all of a sudden, you got guys like Daniel Shays out in Massachusetts and everything that's trying to basically it's trying to foreclose on the lands of debt-ridden farmers, right? And he's going to start what's called Shays Rebellion. Well, this is an armed conflict. These same guys that had fought in the American Revolution, who were heroes then, are now fighting what they see as tyranny from Massachusetts. And so they're going to start up this rebellion. Well, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to call and they're going to say, hey, send troops, send troops, send troops. But all they can do is ask states to do that. States don't actually have to send troops because there's no real powers in the Articles of Confederation. Shays Rebellion is basically going to prove to us that we have to have a new form of government. Otherwise, we're not even going to be able to respond if a foreign country attacks us because states might not even send soldiers. What was Shays Rebellion? Shays Rebellion was an attempt to prevent the state of Massachusetts from foreclosing on the lands of debt-ridden farmers, right? But it is going to be that thing that helps to bring about change because we realized how weak this government was because of that. This is going to call for the Annapolis Convention, which basically the Annapolis Convention is kind of just a precursor to the Constitutional Convention that takes place in Philadelphia in 1787. All right. Hence your test question. The 1787 convention to draft a new constitution was held in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. All right. At that constitutional convention in Philadelphia in 1787. They are going to originally meet and talk about the idea of modifying, amending, changing the Articles of Confederation because clearly there were some problems. However, the very first thing that they realized at the Constitutional Convention is that there was no fixing the Articles of Confederation. It was designed to have a weak government, and a weak government is what it was. So you can't change the Articles of Confederation. They decided from the word go that they've got to scrap and start all over. This put guys like James Madison and others after these debates and everything like that to actually writing a new constitution. And the document that they're going to come up with is still the document that we are living with today. I mean, this is a powerful thing, right? Test question here. The writing of the Constitution demonstrates the triumph of the common good over self-interest. All right, there's your answer. So what happens here during this particular process of meeting and everything like that? Well, there were two major plans that were proposed. Now, the very first one is called the Virginia Plan. Let's talk about the Virginia Plan and the New Jersey Plan. The Virginia Plan, you need to understand, was a large state plan. It benefited the larger states way more than it would have benefited smaller states. It gave more power to the national government. It did have a bicameral legislature, which means two houses. We're going to call them, and very much based off the same kind of principle and idea that there was in England or in Britain, which was a bicameral legislature. There's an upper house and a lower house. But the Virginia plan asked for representatives, okay, or representation to be based on population. And the reason why these large states like Virginia wanted this is because it was going to benefit them. Virginia had the largest population. They were the biggest state. They were the most powerful state in our union. And quite honestly, as a country, we knew we had to have Virginia to be a part of this thing. And so Virginia kind of held a lot of sway over this. Think about where the majority of our early presidents came from. They came from Virginia. It was a Virginia dynasty, basically, right? Important thing. The Virginia Plan, to give you your test question, proposed a system of representation in the national legislature that was based on the population. Where you at? Based on the population of each state, the proportion of each state's revenue contribution, or both. Okay, that's the answer you're looking for. But the other plan was the New Jersey Plan. The New Jersey Plan was a small state plan, and the New Jersey Plan was much more similar to the Articles of Confederation than the Virginia Plan because it actually was giving more power to the state governments, the New Jersey Plan was. And they called for a unicameral legislature, which means only one house, and they believed that the number of representatives should be equal from each state. Why would small plans or a small state plan like New Jersey plan want this? Well, because it gave them equal power to states like Virginia. They didn't want some kind of overly powerful government that was overly powerful for states like Virginia. They need a voice for the little guy too. What they're going to come up with is called the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise is going to kind of take a little bit of elements of both of these plans and put them together in what will essentially become our Constitution. It will call for a bicameral legislature, which is what Virginia wanted. And it will have the number of representatives based on state populations in the House of Representatives. Okay. But the number of representatives would be equal from each state in the upper house, known as the Senate. Okay. And so you have a little bit of the New Jersey plan, a little bit of the Virginia plan. And there were a few things that did take place here. So let me give you a few quick test questions here. What did the New Jersey plan propose for Congress? And the answer to that is that representation would be equal for each state. The second question here, though, is during the Philadelphia Convention, the New Jersey plan was supported by, and the answer to that is less populous states. And then finally, in order to win concessions from larger states at the Philadelphia Convention, representatives from smaller states, such as Delaware, threatened to form alliances with foreign nations. Okay? As in, like, legitimately, these small states, in order to get everybody else to play ball, they was going to have to play some kind of card because Virginia, they had a lot of power. How do we keep these guys from dominating this thing? They said, well, we will involve other foreign governments in decisions making, things like we don't want them involved. Okay, and so they made their threats, and that's another test question for you there. But it's not like the larger states didn't come up with a few threats of their own. Let's talk about probably the most controversial of these threats, and this comes down to the way that we account. Or we count for population for the purposes of representation. Virginia wanted to count their slaves as part of their population when it came to counting for how many representatives they would get. They're basically playing whatever card they can to try to get more political power. It's just that the hypocrisy in this thing is genuinely frustrating. The state of Virginia doesn't see these slaves as humans. They don't see them as humans, and yet they want to count them as humans, as part of the population, for purpose of representation. This is going to lead to the most embarrassing portion of the founding period and of the Constitution, because we're going to finally agree with them, because, again, we have to have Virginia to play ball. We're going to agree to count 3 out of every 5 slaves towards the overall population of Virginia and other slave-owning states for purposes of representation, which means that we call this the 3/5 Compromise, which essentially means that we, by our constitutional reckoning, believe them to be about 60% human, which to me is just insulting, right? Test question here. The 3/5 Compromise determined that 3 out of every 5 slaves would be counted for purposes of representation and taxation. Ugh. All right. Let me give you another one. Primary goal of the founders in writing the United States Constitution was to devise a system that was consistent with the dominant philosophical and moral principles of the day, while also promoting commerce and protecting private property from radical state legislatures. All right. Let me see what else we have here. Let's get into the Constitution. I keep going wrong direction. Here we go. Move my face. Constitution. Compared to the Articles of Confederation, the Constitution increased the power of the central government. That's the most important thing you need to know. It did increase the power of the central government. It's going to be way stronger than the Articles of Confederation, and yet still very limited in comparison to what we see with modern governments and whatnot. The Constitution is going to increase the power along the lines of commerce and finances, which means that we can coin money as a government. We We can regulate interstate trade. We can do all these kinds of things. This is going to give the national judicial branch supremacy over the state judicial branches. And so we get the supremacy clause, and you'll see that here in a little bit. And it is going to have a stronger executive branch because we wanted energy in the executive. That's the phrase you're going to need to know over and over and over and over in this class, especially once we get to that branch of government in that specific chapter. This is going to give us the three branches of government. What were the three branches of government created by the Constitution? And the answer is they are the constitutional, I'm sorry, they are the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. Goodness gracious, rough day. These three branches of government, you're going to see them kind of outlined in the first, second, and the third articles in this Constitution. And we're going to see a Bill of Rights that's added to the Constitution, the first 10 amendments to our Constitution. There's going to be separation of powers, that Baron de Montesquieu thing we started talking about. And it's also going to have federalism. And federalism is an extremely, extremely important part of this class. Matter of fact, Chapter 3 is going to be entirely about federalism. And federalism is sometimes too easily defined as the separation of powers between the federal or central government and its constituent state units, right? Translation, it's a separation of power between the federal government and the state governments. What kind of things can the state have power over, and what kind of things does the federal government have power over? And we'll spend a whole chapter talking about those things. So let's talk about the 7 articles that are in the Constitution. Article 1 is going to be the power and structure of the legislative branch, okay? It's an important thing for us to understand that our founders planned on the legislative branch being the most important branch in government. While there's checks and balances, there's separation of powers, they made Article 1 about the legislative branch because they expected it would be the one that maintained most power. Over time, what Americans have had a tendency to do is to increase, even if it's just in their own minds, the power of the president and the executive branch specifically, when it comes to the way that we view power. In reality, the legislative branch was supposed to be the more powerful. If you read through Article 1 of the Constitution, which we will, you're going to see that they spend a lot more time explaining the powers of the legislative branch than they do of the executive and of the judicial. Okay, and plus they put it first. It is going to explain bicameralism, is in that there is a House and that there is a Senate. They're going to show the expressed powers of government, and there's a whole list of things that are on there that, again, we'll read, that shows what those specific powers are. They had the power to lay and collect taxes and collect duties and to form armies and to do all these kind of things and to regulate the mail, right? All kinds of express powers. They also have the necessary and proper clause that's listed in there, which is going to be a rather important thing because it's kind of the etc. button. It provides for the potential expansion of congressional and national government power and for an ever-changing economy and culture in the United States. And basically, the Constitution is going to say that the legislative branch has the power to do this, and then the necessary proper clause is going to say, and they have the power to do whatever is necessary and proper to make this thing happen. Okay, and that's going to be quite widely expanded there, right? Article 2 is going to be about the executive branch. The executive branch. The president was supposed to be independent of the legislative branch. This is that balance of powers thing. He was supposed to be the country's commander in chief, which is his military title. He's also going to have the power to appoint executive and judicial officials, to veto legislation, and a number of other things. But when it comes down to it, let's think about who elects these guys, right? Let's back up here to the legislative branch. What is the one branch of government that is actually elected? I'm sorry, what's the one person in government that's elected by the common person, by the average voter, right? Directly elected by the people. And the answer to that is originally it was just the House of Representatives. They're the only ones that were popularly elected by the people. The people who were going to be in the upper house, called the Senate, they were supposed to be elected by the people who are in the state legislatures of the individual states. So, therefore, the representatives and senators of the state of Pennsylvania, of Maryland, right? They're the ones who would elect their senators, those two people who would go to represent each state originally. That is going to change because the 17th Amendment to the United States Constitution in 1913 is going to change that. And that's going to mean that the people who are senators are going to be directly elected by the people, just like the representatives are. Again, that change will happen. Whether that's good or bad, we can discuss in class, right? So then who are the ones that end up electing the president of the United States? And technically speaking, the answer to that is the Electoral College. What does that even mean? Right? Well, essentially, the Electoral College works like this. Each state will vote for president of the United States. Let's say the state of Oklahoma. We have 7 electors, which is it basically counts to our 2 senators plus our 5 representatives. We have 7 electors that go and represent Oklahoma, and all of them will vote the same way. All right. They'll all vote for the one person who ended up winning the popular election in the state of Oklahoma. And those 7 votes are going to go towards the overall tally to be determining who is president of the United States. All right. It's a confusing process. It genuinely is. And we'll talk about it in class as far as why. Is it good? Is it bad? Whatever. But your test question, anyways, is the Electoral College is designed to select the president of the United States. Right. Article 3 is going to deal with the selection of powers of the judicial branch. Okay. Justices and judges would be appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. And the phrase we get in the Constitution is that they are appointed by the president with the advice and consent of the Senate. They serve lifetime terms because we don't want politics involved in the way judicial decisions are being made, because that would give an awful lot of turmoil and upheaval in the regular everyday process of the United States culture and government. And it also established judicial supremacy over state judicial decisions. So that supremacy clause, again, will be a rather important thing, right? Let's go to Articles 4 and 6, and then Article 5 will be after this, but 4 and 6. Key article elements of Article 4 promote national unity and power. And one of the phrases we get in there is reciprocity among the states that must give full faith and credit to the acts of other states. We'll get into that in class, but the full faith and credit clause is a rather important thing, and you'll see why later. It also guarantees the citizens of any state the privileges and immunities of every other state. And again, we'll talk about more specifically in class what that entails. And then finally, Article 6's supremacy clause states that laws of the national government, the federal government, and treaties are the supreme law of the land. All right. So again, what does Article 5 end up doing? Article 5 sets forth the procedures for amending the Constitution. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and let you see the charts. You can kind of see the way this plays out. Basically, you have 2 routes of this, and each of these routes has kind of the same thing on the side. You can pass it in the Senate and House by 2/3, right? And it can be accepted in the in 3/4 of the state legislatures, right? This is route 1, and this is primarily the one that all these things have ever done. Okay. There's another thing that's referred to as conventions. Okay. These routes have never been taken. They've never actually been successful. You can call a national convention called by Congress in response to petitions by 2/3 of the states, and you can also accept it by conventions called for the purpose in 3/4 of the states. Okay, but no matter what, it's going to go from 2/3 to 3/4, 2/3 to 3/4. Whether you go by here to here, here to here, here to here, or here to here. Okay, routes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that's essentially what that article is actually going to give us in terms of the way it functions. So let me get into what remains of these few test questions, so we can kind of be all on the same page. Which office did the framers design to be directly elected by the people? And the answer to that is the United States representative. According to Article 2 of the Constitution, the president has the power to officially recognize other nations. Next one. The power of judicial review was asserted by the court in the case of Marbury v. Madison. That'll be an important thing we talk about in class as well. The direct election of senators was instituted with the passage of the 17th Amendment in 1913, one of the things we just said a second ago. Next one. The framers of the United States Constitution intended to create a presidency capable of let me find it here. Capable of withstanding excessive popular pressure by making it subject to indirect election through the Electoral College. We'll talk about it. The next one, the delegates to the Philadelphia Convention turned down the idea of including a list of citizens' rights in the Constitution because they believed that since the federal government was already limited to its express powers, further protection of citizens was not needed. And as we're going to see, we're going to end up changing that policy anyways and adding that Bill of Rights. And it's a rather good thing we did. Okay. That's going to be all for now. Go ahead and make sure you finish this stuff up. And good luck, and I'll see you in class.